Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched Earth grow larger on the main screen. 3 months had passed since the final battle at Kepler Station, where humanity had broken the back of the Galactic Federation fleet. The war was over and humanity had won, but Jake felt no joy as he looked at his battered ship limping home. Captain Lisa Kane walked up beside him holding a datapad. Her uniform was clean, but her face showed the weight of what they had all been through. She had been his second in command for 8 years, and Jake trusted her more than anyone else in the fleet. Lisa cleared her throat softly before speaking. "Sir, the final casualty reports are in," she said quietly. "We lost 612 ships out of our original 1,000. That means 360,000 crew members are not coming home." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected the numbers to be bad, but hearing them spoken aloud made his chest feel tight. The Federation had thrown everything they had at humanity in those final battles. Wave after wave of alien ships had crashed against the human fleet like water against rocks. But rocks could be worn down and the human fleet had nearly shattered completely. "What about the colonies?" Jake asked. Lisa looked at her datapad again. 17 worlds were completely destroyed. Another 23 suffered major damage. The population count across all human space is down by 31%. Commander Alex Turner approached from his station at the intelligence console. Alex was a thin man with sharp eyes who had spent the war reading intercepted alien communications. He had warned them many times about Federation tactics, and his warnings had saved countless lives. But now Alex looked worried in a way that made Jake feel uneasy. "Admiral, we need to talk," Alex said. "I've been going through the captured Federation data cores, and what I found is disturbing." Jake turned away from the main screen. Earth was still hours away, and this conversation sounded important. "What did you find?" Alex activated a holographic display that showed a map of their local galactic region. Red dots marked Federation worlds while blue dots showed human colonies. But there were also purple dots scattered throughout the map that Jake had never seen before. "These purple markers represent something the Federation called dead zones," Alex explained. "According to their records, these were once thriving star systems with billions of inhabitants. Now they're completely empty. No life, no technology, nothing." Lisa frowned at the display. "What happened to them?" "The Federation archives mention something called the Devourers," Alex continued. "The records are incomplete, but it seems like every 20,000 years, something sweeps through this part of the galaxy and wipes out entire civilizations." Jake studied the holographic map more carefully. The dead zones formed a rough pattern that seemed to spiral inward from the galaxy's edge. "When was the last time this happened?" "According to the Federation calendar, about 18,000 years ago," Alex replied. "But here's the problem. Our victory over the Federation wasn't quiet. We used nuclear weapons, antimatter drives, and quantum torpedoes across 17 star systems. The energy signatures from those battles have been broadcasting our location across half the galaxy." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he began to understand what Alex was suggesting. They had announced humanity's presence to whatever had destroyed all those other civilizations. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. Alex shrugged helplessly. "The Federation records don't say how fast these Devourers travel or even what they really are. It could be years or it could be months." Lisa looked between the two men. "Maybe we're wrong about this. Maybe those worlds were destroyed by something else." Alex pulled up another display showing Federation military records. "I don't think so. Look at this. The Federation had over 10,000 ships when the war started, but their total manufacturing capacity could have produced 50,000 ships. Why keep such a small fleet?" Jake studied the numbers. The Federation had always seemed strangely restrained in their attacks on human worlds. They had the technology and resources to build a much larger military, but had chosen not to do so. They were hiding, Jake realized. The whole war, they were trying to stay as quiet as possible while still dealing with the human problem. "Exactly," Alex confirmed. "And we just made enough noise to wake up whatever they were hiding from." The 3 officers stood in silence as the implications sank in. Humanity had fought desperately for survival against the Federation and had won at terrible cost. But that victory might have doomed them to face something far worse than anything they had ever imagined. Jake looked back at the main screen where Earth continued to grow larger. Millions of people on the homeworld were preparing to celebrate humanity's greatest military victory. Parades were planned, Monuments were being built, and children were learning songs about the brave soldiers who had saved them from alien conquest. But those people didn't know what Jake knew now. They didn't understand that the real war might just be beginning. "We need to brief the president as soon as we reach Earth," Jake said finally. "And we need to start preparing for the possibility that what's coming next will make the Federation war look like a training exercise." Lisa nodded grimly. "What do we tell the crew?" Jake thought about the thousands of men and women aboard the Defiance who had fought so hard to bring them all home safely. They deserved to enjoy their victory at least for a little while longer. Nothing yet, he decided. Let them have their moment. God knows they've earned it. But start quietly reviewing our defensive capabilities and see what we can learn from the Federation technology we captured. Alex began shutting down the holographic display. "I'll keep analyzing the alien data cores. Maybe I can find more information about these devourers." As the three officers returned to their duties, Jake remained standing before the main screen. Earth filled most of the view now, blue and green and beautiful in the starlight. It looked peaceful from space, with no sign of the celebrations and grief happening on its surface. Jake had spent his entire career protecting that world and its people. The Federation war had tested him in ways he had never imagined, but somehow they had all survived and emerged victorious. Now it seemed like that victory might have been the worst thing that could have happened to humanity. But Jake Morrison had not become an admiral by giving up when things looked impossible. If something was coming for Earth, then humanity would face it the same way they had faced the Federation. They would fight with everything they had, and they would never surrender, even if it killed them all. President Helen Carter stood behind the podium in the White House press room and looked out at the sea of reporters and cameras. 6 months had passed since Admiral Morrison's fleet had returned from their victory over the Galactic Federation, and the celebration parades had long since ended. Now Helen faced a much harder task than celebrating victory. She had to hold together a human civilization that was tearing itself apart. "My fellow citizens," Helen began, her voice steady despite the weight on her shoulders. "Today I want to address the growing unrest in our outer colonies and the challenges we face in rebuilding our civilization." The questions started immediately. A reporter from the Mars Broadcasting Network stood up without waiting to be called. "Madam President, the Mars Colonial Assembly has voted to declare independence from Earth. They claim that Earth's leadership forced them into a war that nearly destroyed the human race. How do you respond?" Helen had been expecting this question, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. Mars had lost 40% of its population during the Federation bombardments. The survivors blamed Earth for starting a fight that could have been avoided through diplomacy. The decision to resist Federation expansion was made by the full Colonial Council with representatives from every human world, Helen replied. Earth did not act alone in this matter. Another reporter jumped up. But Earth provided the military leadership and made the strategic decisions. Admiral Morrison is from Earth. General Davis is from Earth. Most of the fleet command structure was Earth-based. General Peter Davis watched the press conference from his office in the Pentagon and felt his jaw clench with frustration. For 6 months, he had been trying to coordinate the massive reconstruction effort while dealing with separatist movements across human space. The outer colonies were in revolt. The inner colonies were demanding more resources. And everyone seemed to forget that Earth had lost more people than any other world. Peter's aide knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "Sir, we have another problem. The Europa Mining Consortium has stopped shipping titanium to the reconstruction yards. They want triple the normal price. Triple." Peter stood up from his desk. Europa's titanium mines were essential for rebuilding the fleet. That's price gouging during a crisis. They claim it's hazard pay for the increased risk of working in damaged facilities, the aide explained. But intelligence suggests they're really trying to stockpile resources for their own defense systems. Peter walked to his window and looked out at the construction cranes rebuilding downtown Washington. The Federation had hit Earth harder than any other world because it was humanity's capital. Entire cities had been reduced to radioactive craters. But Earth was rebuilding while the colonies seemed more interested in fighting each other than working together. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos was 3 levels underground in a classified facility outside Denver, studying captured Federation technology. The alien computers were incredibly advanced, but their security systems had been designed to keep out Federation enemies, not humans. Maria had been able to crack several data cores, and what she found made her blood run cold. "Dr. Hayes, you need to see this," she called to the chief xenobiologist working at the next station. Dr. Kevin Hayes was a short, energetic man who had spent his career studying alien life forms. The Federation prisoners had taught him more about galactic biology in 6 months than humanity had learned in 2 centuries of space exploration. But the information Maria had found was unlike anything in his textbooks. "What did you discover?" Kevin asked as he walked over to Maria's workstation. Maria activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be a galactic map, with strange symbols scattered across it. The Federation called this their Extinction Archive. It's a record of every major civilization that has disappeared from this part of the galaxy over the last 100,000 years. Kevin studied the symbols carefully. Each one represented a species that had once built cities, explored space, and dreamed of the future. Now they were just markers on an alien map. "How many civilizations are we talking about?" Kevin asked. "Over 400, Maria replied quietly. And according to the Federation records, they all disappeared during regular cycles that occur every 20,000 years. Kevin felt his hands begin to shake as he read through the Federation files. The pattern was always the same. A civilization would reach a certain level of technological development, then suddenly all communication would stop. Federation scout ships would find empty worlds with no signs of life or technology. The Federation archives call the cause of these extinctions the Devourers, Maria continued. But the files don't contain much specific information. It seems like the Federation itself only survived the last cycle by hiding in deep space until the danger passed. Kevin pulled up additional files that showed Federation population records over the last 20,000 years. The numbers revealed a disturbing truth. The Federation had once been a thriving alliance of hundreds of species with trillions of citizens. But 18,000 years ago, their population had dropped to less than 1% of its previous size. They've been hiding ever since, Kevin realized. The entire Federation civilization has been living in fear for 18,000 years. Maria nodded grimly. And now they're all dead, killed by us, which means humanity is alone when these Devourers return. The 2 scientists worked in silence for several minutes, reading through more Federation files. The aliens had been meticulous record keepers, and their archives contained detailed observations of previous extinction cycles. But the information was fragmented and incomplete, as if the Federation had deliberately avoided learning too much about their enemies. "There's something else," Maria said finally. "According to these records, the Devourers aren't random in their targets. They seem to be attracted to civilizations that make too much noise or expand too aggressively." Kevin understood immediately. Humanity's war with the Federation had been the loudest and most violent conflict in this region of space for thousands of years. If the Devourers were drawn to aggressive species, then humanity had painted a target on their backs. Back in Washington, President Carter finished her press conference and returned to the Oval Office where Admiral Morrison was waiting with more bad news. "The Titan colony has declared martial law," Jake reported. "Their governor claims that Earth forces are planning to seize control of their methane refineries." Helen sat down behind her desk and rubbed her temples. "Are we planning to seize control of their refineries?" "No, but they don't believe us," Jake replied. "Fear is making everyone paranoid. The colonies think Earth is trying to consolidate power. Earth thinks the colonies are abandoning us when we need unity most." Helen looked at the classified reports scattered across her desk. The information about the Devourers was still secret, known only to a handful of high-ranking officials. But she was beginning to wonder if keeping it secret was the right choice. Maybe humanity needed to know about the real threat they faced. "Jake, how much time do you think we have before these Devourers arrive?" Jake shrugged helplessly. "Commander Turner's best estimate is anywhere from 6 months to 6 years. The Federation records just don't provide enough information. And if they come while humanity is fractured like this, then we're all dead," Jake said simply. "We can't fight an extinction-level threat when we're busy fighting each other." Helen made a decision that she knew would change everything. "Call an emergency session of the Colonial Council. It's time to tell them the truth about what's really coming." Jake nodded and left to make the arrangements. Helen remained alone in the Oval Office, looking out at the city still rebuilding from the Federation attacks. Soon she would have to tell humanity that their greatest victory had doomed them all, and that the real war was just beginning. Captain Nathan Clark floated in the observation deck of the UES Horizon and stared at something that should not exist. 2 years had passed since President Carter had revealed the truth about the Devourers to the Colonial Council, and humanity had spent those years preparing for the worst. Now Nathan and his crew were seeing exactly how bad the worst could be. "Captain, are you getting this data?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Johnson from the bridge. She was the ship's sensor operator and had been tracking the massive gravitational anomalies for 3 days as they approached the galaxy's edge. "I'm seeing it, but I don't believe it," Nathan replied through his communication device. The Horizon was humanity's most advanced reconnaissance ship, built with captured Federation technology and designed to operate in deep space for months at a time. But nothing had prepared Nathan for what they had found at the coordinates Commander Turner had calculated. The thing in front of them was the size of a small moon, but it moved like a living creature. Dark tendrils of matter stretched out from its central mass, reaching toward nearby asteroids and consuming them completely. Where the tendrils touched rock and ice, the material seemed to dissolve and flow back toward the central mass, making it larger and more complex. "How many of these things are there?" Nathan asked. "Long-range sensors show at least 50 similar masses in this region," Sarah reported. "And, Captain, they're all moving in the same direction." Nathan felt ice form in his stomach. "Toward human space?" "Yes, sir. Current trajectory puts them at the outer colonies in approximately 18 months. Nathan activated the ship's quantum communication system and established contact with Earth. The signal would take several minutes to reach Admiral Morrison at Fleet Command, but this information could not wait. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Clark aboard the Horizon. We have confirmed contact with what we believe are the Devourers. Recommend immediate implementation of Defense Protocol 7. While Nathan waited for a response, he continued studying the alien entities through the ship's powerful telescopes. The creatures seemed to be systematically consuming everything in their path, from asteroids to gas clouds to the radiation from nearby stars. Nothing was left behind except empty space. Commander Rachel Ford was monitoring the same data stream from her position at Deep Space Command on Luna. Rachel had been studying Devourer movement patterns for 18 months, trying to predict when and where they would strike first. The speed of their approach had surprised everyone. "They're accelerating," Rachel reported to General Davis through a secure channel. "Original estimates put first contact at 2.5 years from now. Current data suggests 18 months, possibly less." General Davis was in his war room deep beneath the Pentagon, surrounded by holographic displays showing human defensive positions throughout the solar system. The last 2 years had seen the largest military buildup in human history as every available resource was devoted to preparing for the Devourer invasion. "How many ships do we have ready for combat?" Davis asked his aide. 287 ships of various classes," came the reply. "That includes the new quantum torpedo cruisers and the experimental gravity well generators." Davis studied the numbers with growing despair. Before the Federation War, humanity had possessed 1,000 ships. The war had reduced that to less than 400 survivors, and 2 years of desperate construction had only brought them back up to fewer than 300 vessels. And we're facing how many enemies? Conservative estimate based on Captain Clark's reconnaissance puts the Devourer force at several thousand individual entities, each approximately the size of a capital ship. The math was simple and terrifying. Humanity would be outnumbered, more than 10 to 1 by creatures that consumed entire solar systems for food. Colonel Dan Wright was reviewing captured Federation tactical manuals when Admiral Morrison entered his office at Fleet Intelligence. Dan had spent 2 years studying every scrap of information about the Devourers that humanity possessed, which wasn't much. "What do we know about their weaknesses?" Morrison asked without preamble. Dan looked up from his computer screen with tired eyes. "According to Federation records, direct military confrontation is useless. Every civilization that tried to fight the Devourers was completely destroyed within weeks." "Then how did the Federation survive?" "They didn't fight," Dan replied. "When the Devourers arrived 18,000 years ago, the Federation shut down all their technology, evacuated to hidden bases in deep space, and waited for the entities to move on to other regions of the galaxy." Morrison sat down across from Dan's desk. "How long did they have to hide?" "The Federation records suggest the active phase of a Devourer cycle lasts about 500 years. They systematically consume everything in their path, then move on to the next region of the galaxy. Morrison felt his heart sink. Humanity couldn't hide for 500 years. They didn't have the resources or the remote bases that the Federation had built over millennia. Earth's colonies were too visible and too dependent on regular supply shipments to survive a prolonged hiding period. There has to be another way, Morrison insisted. Dan pulled up a holographic display showing Federation battle reports from their last encounter with the Devourers. There might be. The records mention that the Devourers have difficulty processing what they call quantum entangled matter. It takes them significantly more energy to consume materials that have been exposed to quantum manipulation. This was the first potentially useful information Morrison had heard in months. Can we weaponize that somehow? Dr. Parker's team has been working on quantum-based weapons for the last year, Dan reported. Their preliminary tests show that quantum torpedoes can disrupt Devourer feeding processes, at least temporarily. Morrison felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. How temporarily? Minutes, maybe hours. The entities seemed to adapt quickly to new forms of attack. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Minutes of disruption wouldn't be enough to drive off thousands of Devourer entities. But maybe it would be enough for something else. Dr. Emma Parker was conducting her latest weapons test in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter when Admiral Morrison's priority message reached her. Emma had been humanity's leading expert on quantum physics before the Federation War, and she had spent the last 2 years trying to turn theoretical science into practical weapons. Test. Number 47 is ready for initiation, reported her assistant from the safety of their observation ship. Emma watched through reinforced windows as her latest quantum torpedo struck a large asteroid. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entire rock began to shimmer with an impossible light, before dissolving into component atoms that scattered in all directions. Impressive destruction, but that's not going to stop something the size of a moon, Emma muttered. Her assistant pulled up readings from the test. Doctor, look at these energy measurements. The quantum disruption effect is spreading beyond the initial impact point. Emma studied the data with growing excitement. The quantum torpedo hadn't just destroyed the asteroid, it had created a field of quantum instability that was still expanding hours after the initial detonation. If we could deploy enough of these weapons in a concentrated area, Emma said slowly, we might be able to create a quantum field large enough to disrupt multiple Devourer entities simultaneously. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than anything else humanity possessed. Emma began calculating how many quantum torpedoes they would need and where they should be deployed for maximum effect. Back on the horizon, Captain Clark received new orders from Admiral Morrison. Instead of returning to Earth immediately, the reconnaissance ship was ordered to shadow the Devourer force and gather as much intelligence as possible about their capabilities and behavior patterns. Nathan didn't like the orders, but he understood their necessity. Humanity needed every advantage they could get, and information about enemy capabilities was worth almost any risk. Set course to maintain parallel with the lead entities, Nathan ordered. Keep us at maximum sensor range and be ready to jump to hyperspace if they detect us. As the Horizon began its dangerous surveillance mission, Nathan looked once more at the advancing darkness that threatened to consume everything humanity had built. In 18 months, these creatures would reach Earth's outer colonies and begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. But humans had never been a species that accepted extinction quietly. If the Devourers wanted to destroy humanity, they would have to fight for every world, every ship, and every life. The real war was about to begin. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Project Last Stand and watched as massive construction robots assembled the largest weapons platform humanity had ever built. 18 months had shrunk to 6 months, and the Devourers were still accelerating toward human space. Every day brought new reports from Captain Clark's reconnaissance mission that made the situation seem more hopeless. How many gravity well generators are operational? Jake asked Captain Susan Miller, who was overseeing the construction project. Susan checked her data tablet while floating beside him in the zero-gravity environment near Jupiter's 4th moon. 12 are fully online and another 8 will be ready within the week. The installations around Saturn are proceeding on schedule, but we're running short on quantum processing cores. Jake nodded grimly. The gravity well generators were humanity's most ambitious defensive system, designed to create artificial gravity fields that could trap devourer entities in specific locations where concentrated firepower could be brought to bear. But each generator required exotic materials that were difficult to manufacture and impossible to replace if destroyed. What about the evacuation programs? Jake asked. General Davis reports that 40% of non-essential personnel have been relocated to the bunker systems in the outer asteroid belt, Susan replied. But we're having problems with the Mars Colonial Assembly. They refuse to abandon their cities. Jake understood the Mars colonists' position even if he disagreed with it. After spending 2 years rebuilding from the Federation attacks, they didn't want to abandon their homes again. But Mars was too close to the expected Devourer approach route to be defensible. General Peter Davis was dealing with similar problems across human space from his headquarters on Earth. The massive evacuation and preparation effort was straining every system humanity possessed, and not everyone was cooperating with the emergency measures. The Titan colony is demanding military protection for their methane refineries, reported his aide. They claim the facilities are too valuable to evacuate. Peter looked at the holographic display showing defensive positions throughout the solar system. Every ship, every weapon, and every fortification was positioned according to carefully calculated plans that assumed certain civilian populations would be safely out of harm's way. If colonies refused to evacuate, the entire defensive strategy would have to be revised. Tell Titan they get protection or evacuation, but not both, Peter decided. We don't have enough ships to defend everything. Meanwhile, Dr. Emma Parker was pushing her quantum weapons research to its absolute limits in laboratories scattered across the solar system. The quantum torpedo technology had shown promise in testing, but scaling it up to face thousands of devourer entities required innovations that pushed human science beyond all previous boundaries. The latest test results are encouraging, reported her lead assistant, Dr. Frank Morris. We can now produce quantum torpedoes at a rate of 50 per day across all manufacturing facilities. Emma did quick calculations in her head. At 50 torpedoes per day, humanity could produce perhaps 9,000 quantum weapons before the devourers arrived. It sounded like a large number until she remembered that they were facing an enemy force in the thousands. What about the quantum mine project? Emma asked. Frank activated a holographic display showing a new type of weapon that could be deployed in space and triggered remotely. The mines are more efficient to produce and can be networked together to create overlapping quantum fields. We could potentially deploy 50,000 mines throughout the outer solar system. This was better news. 50,000 quantum mines wouldn't stop the devourers, but they might disrupt their feeding processes long enough for human forces to inflict serious damage. Commander Luke Thompson had been working on the mine deployment strategy from his position aboard the modified cargo ship UES Builder. Luke had spent months studying devourer movement patterns and identifying the optimal locations for defensive minefields. The key is to funnel them into killing zones, Luke explained to Admiral Morrison during their weekly strategy meeting. If we place the mines correctly, we can force the devourers to approach our defensive positions through narrow corridors, where concentrated firepower will be most effective. Jake studied Luke's tactical projections with growing hope. For the first time in months, humanity seemed to have a plan that might actually work, even if the odds remained terrible. How long do you estimate our defenses will hold? Jake asked. Best case scenario, assuming everything works perfectly and the devourers don't adapt faster than expected, maybe 3 months, Luke replied. Worst case scenario, 3 days. Jake nodded soberly. 3 months would be enough time to evacuate most of humanity's civilian population to the deep space bunkers. 3 days would barely be enough to broadcast surrender terms. If the devourers were the type of entities that accepted surrender, back on Earth, President Helen Carter was addressing the Global Defense Council about the final preparations for humanity's last stand. Representatives from every human world and colony had gathered to coordinate their species' desperate gamble for survival. Ladies and gentlemen, we face the greatest threat in human history, Helen began. In less than 6 months, entities that have destroyed hundreds of civilizations will reach our space. Our military estimates suggest we have perhaps a 5% chance of survival. The council chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed this information. 5% was better than 0, but not by much. However, I want you all to remember something. Helen continued. Humanity has never been a species that accepts impossible odds quietly. We didn't surrender to the ice ages that nearly drove us extinct. We didn't surrender to the diseases and disasters that threatened our ancestors. And we didn't surrender to the Galactic Federation when they demanded our submission. A few representatives nodded, caught up in Helen's words despite their fear. The Devourers may be more powerful than anything we've ever faced, but they've never faced anything like humanity before. They've consumed civilizations that hid in fear when threatened. They've destroyed species that accepted extinction as inevitable, but humans fight hardest when the odds are worst. And we never stop believing that impossible victories are still possible. Meanwhile, across human space, the final preparations continued at a frantic pace. Every factory was producing weapons or defensive equipment. Every ship was being retrofitted with the latest technology. Every person was being trained for combat or evacuation procedures. Captain Nathan Clark continued his dangerous surveillance mission at the galaxy's edge, sending back regular reports about Devourer capabilities and behavior. His latest transmission contained disturbing news about the entity's ability to communicate with each other across vast distances. They're coordinating their approach, Nathan reported. The entire force is moving as a single organism, with advanced scouts probing human defensive positions while the main body follows predetermined routes that will bring them into our space. Simultaneously from multiple directions, this information forced Admiral Morrison to revise humanity's defensive strategy completely. Instead of facing a single massive assault, human forces would have to deal with coordinated attacks across dozens of star systems. We're going to have to split our forces, Jake told his senior staff during an emergency meeting. Every major colony will need at least token defenses to prevent the Devourers from simply bypassing our main defensive positions. Captain Miller raised an obvious concern. If we spread our forces too thin, we won't have enough concentrated firepower to stop them anywhere. And if we concentrate our forces in one location, they'll just go around us and consume everything else, Jake replied. We need a strategy that forces them to fight us on our terms. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kevin Hayes, who had been studying Devourer biology for 2 years, discovered something crucial in the Federation archives that had been overlooked. They can't ignore quantum entangled matter, Kevin reported during a video conference with the senior leadership. According to these files, when Devourers encounter quantum fields, they have to either consume them or find alternate routes. They can't simply bypass them. This revelation changed everything. If humanity deployed quantum mines correctly, they could create barriers that the Devourers would be forced to confront directly, rather than simply going around. We'd turn the entire solar system into a trap, Jake realized. Use the quantum mines to channel them exactly where we want them, then hit them with everything we have. It was still a desperate plan with minimal chances of success, but it was better than anything humanity had possessed before. As the final months of preparation began, every human being understood that their species' survival depended on their ability to accomplish something no other civilization had ever managed. They had to make the Devourers pay such a high price for victory that even entities who consumed galaxies would decide that humanity wasn't worth the cost the trap was being set, and soon they would discover if humans were as dangerous as they believed themselves to be. The Devourers emerged from hyperspace like a living nightmare that stretched across half the solar system. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as his sensors tried to catalog an enemy force that defied comprehension. What had once been discrete entities had merged into flowing rivers of converted matter that pulsed with alien intelligence. Contact in 17 minutes, reported Captain Lisa Kane from her position at the tactical station. All defensive systems are online and quantum minefields are armed. Jake nodded while studying the holographic display that showed humanity's desperate defensive positions scattered throughout the outer solar system. 280 ships, 12 gravity well generators, and 50,000 quantum mines stood between the Devourers and Earth's 8 billion inhabitants. All ships. This is Admiral Morrison, Jake broadcast on the Fleet Communication Channel. Today we face an enemy that has destroyed hundreds of civilizations over thousands of years. They expect us to hide or surrender like every other species they've encountered. Let's show them they've never met anything like humanity before. Commander Alex Turner was monitoring enemy movements from his intelligence station when he detected something unexpected in the Devourer formation patterns. "Admiral, they're not attacking randomly. The entities are following predetermined routes that seem designed to test our defensive responses." Jake frowned at this information. Intelligence suggested the Devourers were more like forces of nature than military strategists. But their current behavior implied sophisticated tactical thinking. "Are they learning from our defensive positions?" Jake asked. "It appears so," Alex replied. "Each probing attack is gathering data about our quantum mine, effectiveness, and weapon capabilities." The first wave of Devourer entities reached the outer quantum minefields, and the results were both encouraging and terrifying. The mines detonated in brilliant flashes of quantum energy that disrupted the aliens' molecular cohesion, causing several entities to break apart into smaller fragments. But within minutes, the fragments began reassembling into new configurations that seemed more resistant to quantum interference. Captain Susan Miller was coordinating the gravity well generators when she received the order to activate the trap that humanity had spent months preparing. Generators 7 through 12. Initiate maximum field strength. Let's see if we can hold these things in place long enough to hit them with concentrated fire. The artificial gravity fields created massive distortions in space-time that caught dozens of Devourer entities and held them motionless for precious seconds. Human ships immediately focused their firepower on the trapped enemies, unleashing nuclear missiles, antimatter torpedoes, and experimental energy weapons. The assault was devastating but brief. The Devourers adapted to the gravity fields within minutes, learning to counter the artificial distortions with their own gravitational manipulations. Soon the entities were moving freely again, continuing their advance toward the inner solar system. Dr. Emma Parker watched her quantum weapons in action from the safety of a deep space observation post and felt her heart sink as she realized the truth about humanity's situation. "They're not just adapting to our weapons," she reported to Admiral Morrison. "They're incorporating our technology into their own structure." Jake saw what Emma meant as he watched Devourer entities absorb the wreckage of destroyed human ships. Where quantum torpedoes had once disrupted their feeding processes, the entities now seemed to digest quantum-entangled matter without difficulty. "How long before they adapt to everything we have?" Jake asked. "At this rate, maybe 6 hours," Emma replied grimly. The battle continued for 3 desperate hours as humanity threw everything they possessed at an enemy that grew stronger with each passing minute. Ships were consumed and their crews converted into more Devourer mass. Defensive stations were overwhelmed and absorbed. The quantum minefields were systematically neutralized and harvested for their exotic materials. Captain Nathan Clark was still aboard the UES Horizon at the edge of the battle zone when he detected something that changed everything. Long-range sensors showed massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of the galactic core. But these weren't more Devourer entities. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Clark," Nathan broadcast on an emergency channel. "I'm detecting what appears to be a massive fleet approaching from galactic coordinates 77 Alpha. Configuration and energy signatures are consistent with Federation technology, but the scale is unlike anything we've seen before." Jake felt a spark of desperate hope. "How many ships?" "Conservative estimate is over 1 million vessels, sir. They'll reach our position in approximately 4 hours." The approaching fleet was larger than anything the Federation had ever deployed during their war with humanity. But Jake didn't have time to wonder where these reinforcements had come from. The Devourers were already breaking through humanity's inner defensive lines, and Earth itself would be under direct assault within hours. "All ships, fall back to defensive position Delta," Jake ordered. "We hold the line until help arrives or until there's nothing left to hold." The retreat was a fighting withdrawal that cost humanity another 50 ships and thousands of lives. But somehow the remaining human forces managed to establish a final defensive perimeter around Earth and Mars just as the mysterious Federation fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. Commander Luke Thompson was monitoring communications when he intercepted a transmission that made him doubt his own sensors. "Admiral, I'm receiving a message from the approaching fleet. They claim to be Federation High Command and they want to speak with our senior leadership." Jake felt confusion mixed with his desperate hope. The Federation High Command had been destroyed along with their entire civilization during the war 2 years ago. but someone was using Federation technology and claiming Federation authority. The answer came when a massive Federation dreadnought approached under a flag of truce, and Admiral Morrison received a communication that shattered everything he thought he understood about the war humanity had fought and won. Admiral Morrison, I am Fleet Commander Zara Thane of the True Federation, came a voice speaking perfect English. We have been monitoring your conflict with the Devourers, and we must speak immediately. Jake authorized the meeting despite his confusion and suspicion. Within an hour, he found himself face to face with an alien commander whose species he had never seen before. Zara Thane was tall and elegant with features that seemed to shift between familiar and utterly foreign. The Federation you destroyed was never the real Federation, Zara explained without preamble. They were descendants of refugees and outcasts who had been hiding in this region of space for 18,000 years. The True Federation has been waiting at the galactic core, preparing for the Devourer's return. Jake felt his understanding of everything shift like sand beneath his feet. Then the war we fought was against frightened survivors who saw humanity as a threat to their precarious existence, Zara confirmed. They attacked you because they feared your expansion would attract Devourer attention before they were ready to flee again. And now the Devourers are here because we were too loud in defeating them. Jake realized. Zara nodded solemnly. But your resistance has impressed us. No species has ever fought the Devourers directly and inflicted the casualties you have managed in just a few hours. Your quantum weapon technology and tactical innovations are unlike anything we've seen in our 1,000-year preparations. Jake looked around the conference room where President Carter, General Davis, and other human leaders were absorbing this revelation. Everything they had believed about their victory over the Federation had been wrong. But maybe that mistake had led to something better. What are you offering? President Carter asked. Partnership, Zara replied. The True Federation has developed technologies and strategies for fighting the Devourers that we believe could be enhanced by human innovations. Together, we might be able to do more than survive the current cycle. We might be able to break it permanently. Admiral Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not hope exactly, but possibility. What would this partnership involve? Full integration of human and Federation military forces, shared technology development, and coordinated resistance against the Devourers across multiple galactic regions, Zara explained. But I must warn you, this would not be a war you could win quickly. The fight against the Devourers has been going on for millions of years, and it may continue for millions more. President Carter looked at her advisors before responding. The alternative is extinction. Yes, Zara confirmed simply. Jake understood that humanity was being offered a choice between certain death and uncertain survival. It wasn't the victory parade they had once imagined, but it was better than watching Earth get consumed by entities that turned entire solar systems into food. There's one condition, Jake said finally. Humanity doesn't hide. We've never been a species that runs from fights, and we're not starting now. If we're going to fight the Devourers, we do it as equals, not as junior partners following orders. Zara smiled, an expression that somehow managed to convey both alien intelligence and familiar respect. Admiral Morrison, that attitude is exactly why we want you as allies, rather.